Hi, this is Victor Devon, and you're listening to WEBurlesque. This is a second part of a bonus episode that was recorded on March 5th and 6th, 2018, where I'm speaking with some entertainers and nightlife performers to discuss their reaction to the RuPaul interview in The Guardian that was released the first week of March 2018. This is part two, and even though the interviews in this segment are self-contained, I really do recommend that you start with part one. There's not really an arc per se, but I think that the flow of the interviews will make a lot of sense in the way that I've arranged them. I really appreciate all of the entertainers taking their time to speak with me, and I hope that you just get something out of this in terms of finding out some perspectives that you may not be aware of, either having solidarity with those with perspectives that are similar to yours, or just inclination to be a little bit more inclusive in the spaces that you visit and the spaces that you create. Thank you again for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. While I was having conversations with performers, a couple of things happened. RuPaul tweeted during the course of the evening. Sometime in the afternoon, he posted, "You can take performance-enhancing drugs and still be an athlete, just not in the Olympics." A few hours later, RuPaul posted again, saying, "Each morning I pray to set aside everything I think," all in capitals, "I know, so I may have an open mind and a new experience. I understand and regret the hurt I have caused. The trans community are heroes of our shared LGBTQ movement. You are my teachers." He followed that up with another post. "In the 10 years we've been casting Drag Race, the only thing we've ever screened for is charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. And that will never change." Along with that tweet, he included an image of the 1953 painting Train Landscape by Ellsworth Kelly.
This call is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect at this time. I'm here conversating with Daphne Always, who is a performer in New York City. Hi, Daphne.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. I wanted to get your perspective as someone. I'm not sure if you're ever interested in a vehicle such as RuPaul's Drag Race, which is honestly a very specific vehicle for performers. And I don't know if you consider yourself a drag queen. I know that you are a trans woman, and yes. I know that you are a cabaret artist.
Yeah, you can find me at Club Coming on 6th Street between A and B every Friday at 8 o'clock for my cabaret show, and every Saturday at 12 o'clock for the party.
Do you use the term drag queen?
When I feel like it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm figuring out if I'm still a drag queen. Sometimes I am.
Okay. To you, what is a drag queen when it applies to you?
For me, I feel more like a drag queen when I'm performing a character, which is generally like when it's a more party sort of room as opposed to more of a cabaret space where I feel like I'm being a little more genuinely myself, if that makes sense.
Sure.
For me, that drag is about the level of artifice to it.
Now, did you at one point more comfortably use the word drag queen to describe most of what you did, or was it more performance art?
It was always drag queen, and only within the past year or so, as I've started transitioning, have I started to explore a sort of performance that doesn't feel like drag as much as it feels like performing myself.
Right.
Making a performance out of myself. And there's drag to that. So I haven't abandoned drag queen yet. I'm just figuring out my relationship with it.
When you are you someone who watches RuPaul's Drag Race?
Unfortunately, I am religiously.
Yeah, it is one of those things that somewhat addicting. It's a formula, and it's a formula that clearly works.
Absolutely.
What is your feeling on the show as it is? Not before getting into like the qualifications that RuPaul seems to have for being on. What do you think of the show in general?
I think that it is a fantastic reality television competition, and I think that it has taken on meaning and a place in the queer community and some straight communities that is maybe a little bit loftier and a little bit more unwieldy than what it should be taken as, which is a reality television competition.
Now, obviously, we have colleagues that have been on the show. We have several people that have been either in the surrounding boroughs of New York or even out-of-towners that have been traveled into New York.
Totally.
Do you feel in your working with them before and after the show, do you feel that there is a difference in the way that they perform since they've been sort of like given the Hunger Games of drag, as it were?
Right. I'd say it depends on the performer. I'll say Sasha, for example, Sasha Velour, who just won season 9. She just seems more herself than ever. I wouldn't say that there's been a switch. It's just, Sasha with that drag race
amplification of it.
Yeah,
just Sasha turned up.
Yes, and then Aja, for example, who's someone that I remember working with when we were both underage and neither of us knew what we were doing, just playing around having fun. Versus now seeing her come off the show, there's just this laser focus and this drag that really is successful on to the palette that is developed by Drag Race.
Now, has it ever even occurred to you that would be a platform that you would even want to investigate?
I think at one point it absolutely was. It seems like the end-all be-all. But I think that was kind of before I actually started working as a performer, as a drag queen. And once I did, I realized that is just not for me. I'm just not... It kind of really defeats the entire purpose of it for me.
Right.
If we're going to sit around and compare and say this is more valuable than that. That said, I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with competition. I just,
But competition with editing sometimes can be.
And I don't think I could handle everybody across the world just having an opinion about how worthwhile my livelihood has been because I wore hair that Michelle Visage read me for filth for, honey.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and I understand that they have to come from a perspective of, well, they're a judge, so they're going to want what they want. And even though Rue, I think, maintains sort of a royal figure on that show, they almost don't seem like a judge themselves.
Right.
Rue doesn't seem like a judge,
right.
And it's more that they're the decision maker. That's not the same thing as a judge. Totally. And then, of course, there's also discussion on how much of it is scripted, how much people know in advance, and that seems to even change season to season. And some queens have been very, very private about it. Some queens, like Willem, have been a bit more public about it, but even then have still been kind of vague. So, obviously, the interview with The Guardian, and I keep calling it an interview, but it's really an article with quotes that are just generously spread around. So, and I understand that the writer is taking these words that were probably recorded and then transcribed and is rearranging them. And I understand that. It's not unlike, it's honestly not unlike the show. It's not unlike the show at all. But the words themselves are there. And it seems to me that even though the writer doesn't seem to have a negative perspective with what Rue is saying, they actually seem to agree. There's even a line out of a quote that says that they don't see how transgender women fit in to the show, and then it gets into the quotes. And that's
when I read that, I took that as this. I don't think RuPaul said anything in this interview that we didn't already know. I think that this writer seemed to be, at least the way I read the article, felt like this writer was kind of like setting up like the logical precedents and then kind of getting RuPaul to add them all up and come out and make the statement that he did about trans women not being women until they have surgeries.
Yeah, it was very much how trans can that person be to still qualify for the show.
Right, and I think that moment when I think the writer was somewhat crafty in the way they wrote the article was first, like, set up the question about women doing drag, and then ask about, like, trans women being on the show, and then pointing out that sort of contradiction as a way to force RuPaul to, like, clarify with the statement that he did about trans women.
I mean, I understand that this is relatively, for Rue at least, uncharted territory of people not just, I mean, obviously trans performers have existed forever and non-binary performers have existed forever. We may have not always had a language for it, or we may not have always had a platform for it, but they've obviously always been around.
Absolutely.
And this is probably one of the more recent times. I mean, it's the first time since Peppermint, so it's the first time since someone got on the show and not only came out as who they are, but then continued on. Like everybody else either came out on a reunion or came out and then were eliminated, so we didn't get a story from it.
Yeah, Peppermint went to the top.
Absolutely. And it became a storyline, and it became part of her. See, you want to fight for her because she's a trans woman, and she has to fight for something. And it did come across a little, I don't know, chariots of fire at times, in my estimation. It was very much like, ironically, like an Olympic pre-video where like we're meant to feel. I mean, and of course, that says nothing about their talent.
I think they do that with all of the girls. They pick a storyline that, does that. And I think that VH1 probably just wanted to tell that story, and they chose Peppermint to be the one to do it.
Yeah, and I think that they very carefully waited until midpoint. They waited till enough queens were away so that it wouldn't be distracting, so they wouldn't get too many outside opinions.
Right.
And they still, however, crafted a look for Peppermint. There's no doubt in my mind, although I have no confirmation from her, that she was told to look a certain way. But having an idea of how Peppermint is likely to present or be comfortable, I don't know. There seemed to be a level of uncomfortable scripting in the workroom and in the interviews and things like that. It just seemed a little off.
All I understand is that, like, they will, have these girls, especially in the confessionals, like, sitting in a dark room in front of a green screen after not being allowed to speak to anyone because they've been in a hotel room alone for hours. Mm-hmm. And then they'll give these girls questions and ask them the same questions over and over until they get the answer they want.
Right.
I think that...
and hopefully something that they can use.
It's just really important to remember that, like, this is a television show.
Well, how do you feel that Rue's decision, and the show in general, obviously, since I've started talking to people, Rue has, for lack of a better word, apologized on social media. And the reason I say for lack of a better word is because it doesn't use the word sorry, and linguistically, it still comes off, at least in my estimation, as a little gymnasticy in terms of its language. But how do you feel that the show, in a good way or a bad way, contributes to what you do and what the scene is that you are, which is obviously not a reality show?
Yeah, I think it does this thing where people start to claim access to performers and their personal lives and like the validity of what they do. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do with the show showing the queens in and out of drag. And, you know, for a long time, the point of a drag queen was that you saw them on the stage and you saw, like, the fantasy that they're crafting in the bar, that they're hosting on a microphone and there's full effect and there's lighting and smoke and and that's how you know that person. Mm-hmm. But then RuPaul's Drag Race introduced this whole idea of, you know, who is the queen, quote, as a boy?
Right.
Which then, if you pull that thread, which inevitably we all did, it leads to part of what is being consumed here is not just the drag performance, but, like, the person themselves, who they are, like, as an individual, like looking at Thorgy, for example, on that show, Thorgy Thor, like, part of her storyline and part of, like, what was shown about her on television was this, like, paranoia and inability to focus, like, these personal traits of hers that suddenly just become fair game for anybody to have an opinion about. Which is, like, kind of unfair to people who have a craft and have an art form that's based on building a character and building a fantasy, because then people aren't willing to see that if they just see the person behind it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, I mean, it is obviously the first time that a lot of people who are first being exposed to drag...
Yes, I think that the show has really made a turn to focus on the, like, young kids who watch the show, and a lot of those kids are, like, straight girls, and a lot of them are, like, young gay people. Mm-hmm. And I think that the show has in mind this kind of, like, post-2008, like, mainstream included gay, you know, this sort of, like, palatable, safe, I don't want to say queer because I feel like the show has in mind, I think of queerness as, like, a life that stands in opposition to the structures and powers that be, right?
Okay.
Whereas Drag Race seems to be focused on assimilating the palatable parts of gay culture into something that is more acceptably mainstream. Which, like, I don't, you know, there's arguments to be made on both sides about that, but I think that the show probably sees itself as pushing for progress in that regard, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say. And there's arguments on heteronormativity in queer culture, and, like, oh, why do we want to be accessible to anyone? Why can't we just be ourselves, and why do we have to apply their rules to us?
Totally.
Or what have you? And then in some ways it's like, because in a lot of ways it's a lot easier in some ways, and I know that seems like like I got married not because I had some burning need to identify myself as a married person. It still blows my mind every now and then that I am married. Like I still
Right.
like, oh right, that's a thing.
Well,
like
congratulations.
wow. Well, thank you. But it was also it's a functional part of our society, and our government has made it in such a way where it's both a statement, which I don't mean it as that. I mean, I love him, obviously, but it's not meant to be like and a fuck you to the folks who said we couldn't do it. That's not why I got married. I didn't do it as a fuck you to anybody.
We got our marriage.
And I mean, to be perfectly honest, there are benefits and rights that are rewarded and given to married couples. That's just society, and so I have to play within some realms of society, even if that somehow doesn't quite jive with how I feel.
Totally. What I've been thinking about lately is in terms of like making social progress, I think that there need to be people like on all degrees of the left fighting. So I think in some ways, as much as like focusing on like a heteronormative idea of queer people is, you know, something that excludes certain types of people and it can be damaging in some ways, I like to think that maybe it opens the door to like the next step of accepting non-heteronormative queer people. Do you know what I mean? Like if someone who's watching VH1 who like has never met a trans person can see Peppermint on there, maybe then in 15 or 20 years, that person or that audience, that demographic will be more open to something a little bit more radical. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That it may not be perfect, but it's progress for now, and it's just really important to keep your eyes like forward and not get too frustrated that there's no perfect answer yet on the scale of like trying to infiltrate the mainstream.
Yeah, it's difficult. Now, how mainstream do you want to be, Daphne? Like, how is fame and fortune the goal, or is self-expression, or a little bit of both? Because that's what I would like.
Yeah, I mean, a balance would be ideal. I don't really know how mainstream I could go. You know what I mean? Like even like part of me wonders if like my transness fundamentally like excludes me from being able to really like be a part of that world. But like I think absolutely I would love to like have a platform where like I can reach people and like feel like they'll listen to me as a person and not just as like an exciting sort of novelty.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that I don't know, it's hard because like at the same time it's not like I want to, you know, I don't think it's the goal isn't to like abandon my queer life and go move into the suburbs and have like a house with a picket fence and like live that life, you know what I mean? So I don't know what going mainstream actually looks like.
That's a pretty reasonable assessment. I don't really know either, and I know that. I mean, you're a cabaret artist. In at least in my mind, that's a lot of how I would sum you up, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know you work at Club Coming and you work at other locations that sort of give like this old school, like I imagine like Barbra Streisand in the West Village kind of thing, or like before they were famous, like before they started getting square gardens and things like that.
Right.
And it harkens back to an intimacy that they never got again. So
Right. I think that, I don't know, one thing, like, sometimes when I'm on a mic, I will get very, frustrated with people, like, videoing the entire show. And I think that, like, that's something that you and I haven't really discussed yet in this conversation, is that, like, social media is, like, the vehicle that all of this stuff is happening on right now.
Yes.
Like, I'm sure that the majority of people who read that article in The Guardian saw it on one of their feeds, not in a paper that was delivered to them,
right.
Not on the television.
And they usually saw it in a screen grab, or they saw it truncated. They didn't see the whole thing, because the whole thing isn't salacious. The rest of the article is actually pretty boring stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I get frustrated when people like will experience a show through the perspective of how they'll share it on their social media. And I think that I try to like cultivate something, especially at places like Club Cumming, where like, no, if you just have a video of it and you watch the video, it's not going to be the same as really being there and smelling the room, like, and remembering that, like, at the other end of the bar there was someone you thought there was really cute and you made eyes with them, but then they were there with someone else, and then the performers start singing a song about heartbreak and everybody raises their glass. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I do. We blindly document things. We take videos of things we never plan on looking at again.
Totally. And like, I think that Drag Race is really, it's a capitalist venture, and like the casting for the show and the way the show and the narratives the show tells are designed like with the fact in mind that people have a 5-second attention span. Like, I think that like Sasha's flower reveal, for example, like that was perfect because it was something that's encapsulated that people can see and just be really awed and like
it's a moment
stricken in an instant. It doesn't take, you don't have to sit and spend 18 minutes reading an article.
It's a good sort of, it sums it up. It sort of sums up her whole journey on Drag Race in an interesting kind of way.
Yes, and it was gorgeous and poignant. That's not a criticism of what that was.
There's an intent in a lot of what Sasha did and how Sasha applied to the show or applied in the show. And I think that a lot of drag performers, when they get on the show, and I think Rue has even said, actually I know Rue has even said this on his podcast and in other media, that a lot of people go on there with a script of their own. Like they plan on saying, okay, and then I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say this.
Yeah,
and
they have the soundbite.
It backfires. It backfires because they're just not able to organically work within the space and then do the 9-hour confessional in the darkened room. That's totally a lot to ask of anybody.
Totally.
Oh.
And I think Sasha is obviously like a genius in like in many different areas, and I think that Sasha is a great example of how like knowing how to play that more like consumer driven game, this sort of meme culture that we live in. I think she's an example of learning how to play that game, get the success you can get, and then do things like donate $8,000 to the Ali Forney Center every month to help actual queer homeless youth who are struggling, Like, I think that even if the system and the show itself is flawed, there is worth in leveraging it to really help people.
It'll put a different light on things for a while because season 10 in the can. Season 10 is done. So with the exception of the finale.
There's not even a week between the two seasons. It's like the finale, then it starts.
It's odd that someone who is so I'll say calculated. I don't think calculated is necessarily a negative word, but as someone as calculated and rehearsed as RuPaul and someone who is so, I mean, a lot of the interviews that you see, they're the same thing. And I know that happens a lot with famous people, is they get asked the same questions because that's on the list. But that they would be so comfortable and be so bold and be so just cool with saying, I know better than a lot of the rest of the world does. And it's time for all of you to get out of the matrix and for you to figure out what's really out there.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about with Rue. Like, he really has, deified himself. And I think, like, really likes to stay on this kind of spiritual guru. We are all God in drag. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. All the world's a stage, everything's constructed, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And while, yes, all of that is true, I think it's really important for people, especially people who have decided to become very public figures, who a lot of people listen to. I think it's really important to be able to pivot and recognize that, yes, like the view from the clouds is one thing, but in the meantime, there's actual people's lives being affected by the fact that you don't want to respect trans women's identities because you think identity is a farce. Like just because yes, gender is constructed, just because it's not inherently natural to the world doesn't mean that it didn't happen and get perpetuated for a few thousand years and become a reality that people have to deal with.
Yeah. Sometimes
it's really
sort of
nice
like going back to that, some people get married for insurance because that's the situation that we're in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's this fundamental misunderstanding of, like, what it means for truths to be constructed, that it means that they aren't true. Like, yes, they're not inherently or, like, empirically true to the world. I don't know if I used empirically correctly, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
But that doesn't mean that like it isn't that everybody doesn't have that understanding, and it's not actually how the world is working. Just because it doesn't have to be doesn't mean that it isn't. And if you are a trans, non-binary, or femme person or a woman who's doing drag, keep it up. Thank you for your resistance in the face of a male-dominated society.
With Allegra Spread, who is a drag artist in New York City. Hello, Allegra.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing well. I wanted to talk to you because I know you are what is usually referred to as a hyper queen or a lady queen or a various other additional words before the word, but in essence,
drag queen.
You are a drag queen. Exactly. You are a drag queen. And I wanted to speak to you as someone who basically was disinvited from the party officially, although we had some rumblings of previous disinvitements. I don't think it's ever been more clear.
Oh, I've been keeping tabs.
I think it's been this is your scrapbook collection of RuPaul basically saying, I am for all intents and purposes, the most famous living drag person on Earth right now, in a manner of speaking. And I run this extraordinarily popular show of people of all different walks of life and pasts and histories and styles, but I'm not inviting you because you were assigned female at birth. Or I'm not inviting you because you're too trans. And I'm not inviting you because you disagree with me and I'm going to block you on Twitter. So, well, that's really what we're at. That's where we're at.
Twitter blocking went out of control today.
So is it safe to say that you are an AFAB person who does drag?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm an AFAB person who does drag, but I identify as non-binary out of drag.
So as when you are in full drag, are you comfortable with she and her pronouns?
Yeah, very much my character as Allegra Spread is an exaggeration of femininity and feminist and like the idea of a woman or whatever that is. So very much she, her pronouns for the character Allegra, yeah.
If someone were to say, I want to know more about Allegra Spread, what should they know about you as a drag performer? What are your influences? What's your style? Who do you say, these are the people that helped shape who I am?
Ooh. Okay, well, I mean, my tagline is the professional asshole. So, I mean, the persona for Allegra is very much is professionally produced in terms of the aesthetic, but the actual style of the way that I host and the way that I hold myself is kind of, no, I wouldn't say, yeah, like an asshole, but the professional kind. Like, I don't know, brassy, I guess, is a way to put that as well. Comedic. Mm-hmm. I do use a lot of comedic timing in my acts. I definitely model myself after folks like Sherry Vine and Lady Bunny in terms of comedic, like old world drag, you know, things coming from Tu Wong Fu and Priscilla Queen of the Desert. I'm heavily influenced by like 80s drag aesthetics.
Okay. How long have you been working?
As a drag queen? Coming up
Sure.
to 1 year in like a few weeks.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, congratulations on a fabulous year. You've had quite a bit.
Yeah.
Now,
it kind of like snowballed. It got out of control really quickly.
For our listeners who may not know, you are Australian, yes?
Yes, I grew up in Australia, but I was born in the States.
Okay. So where do you hail from?
Born in Philly and raised in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia.
And do you find yourself going back and forth?
Not so much. It's a really long plane ride.
It's a really long plane ride.
And Brisbane and Australia as a whole has a lot more work to do in the whole gay and trans liberation movement. They're far behind, and I realized that when I was back in Australia in November. So I'm good in New York.
Now, one of the things you do in New York is you actually run a drag race viewing party. And
I do.
Obviously, we thought the biggest gag of the season was, spoiler alert for anyone who needs to know it, that Ben de la Creme left the show. However, it almost seems to have been edged out by this interview that RuPaul had where he says no, it probably would not have had a trans performer that he knew was trans or had taken the steps that he decided was too much trans, basically, and also was not interested in AFAB performers being on his show. As someone who has a lot of respect for a lot of what RuPaul has accomplished, but still thinks he's full of shit, I'm managing it. I'm managing it, and I'm still going to watch the show. I understand if people find it hypocritical.
Right.
I'm not. I don't know. To me, it's complicated. How do you, especially as someone who's hosting an event around it, how do you put that all together?
Yeah, of course. So what I find interesting about somebody like me hosting a drag race viewing party was actually maybe a little bit confusing to some people that I come across in my Muggle life, and they actually asked me like, "Oh, I mean, you're a drag queen, sure, it's confusing that you're assigned female at birth and you're a drag queen, not a drag king. That's confusing enough for these people that don't have any connection to nightlife. But whatever, that's their own thing to figure out. And then they're confused again because they know the background of RuPaul not having any AFAB queens on the show. And, you know, like what had been a gray area in relation to trans queens, which has now really just come to light as a, you know, transitioned queens is a big no-no, et cetera, which is just like completely blown people out of the water, which was not surprising information to me when I saw it. I was like, yeah, well, I've known this for a while. But yeah, like you said, like RuPaul was a very important person in, you know, in the scene of like bringing drag to the mainstream to really give it and like an elevated platform. But just because one person does a lot of legwork, it doesn't mean that they get to be the end length and final say of who is allowed to partake in this community that has grown bigger than him. Like he maybe facilitated the growth of it, but it didn't actually grow bigger than him. And specifically for my viewing party, what I actually decidedly did and mixed together when I cast everybody back in January was I wanted trans queens, black queens, like Muslim queens, any kind of queen that wouldn't be allowed to be on the show, basically, to be making commentary and to perform and to have a platform to make some money and to do their drag in the midst of that crowd. And it does perplex my audience a little bit at the bar because they're expecting mainstream queens sometimes, and they should know from just knowing me that I'm not a mainstream queen. But these people don't know me from a bar of soap, to use an Australian expression. But
what was it? They don't know you from a bar of soap?
Yes.
I like that. I like that.
There's a new idiom for you. So they don't know me from a bar of soap. They're like, I don't know who this bitch is. I don't know her life. But I specifically say on the mic, hey, we're actually going to be critiquing this show and, you know, having some queer and political discourse. If you don't like it, it's my show and I have a microphone. But I hope that you like it, and I hope that, you know, the neighborhood is more progressive than maybe, you know, it's important to give these performers a platform. Yes. Specifically in the guise of the show and what it does not allow. It's kind of like my own guerrilla fuck you to the system of RuPaul's Drag Race. Sneaky.
No, I think that's commendable. When you're sort of viewing it as a way of sort of counterbalancing and sort of using it as an opportunity to respond to it, I think you're that much more putting a microscope on the show and saying, hey, see everything that we're doing?
Absolutely.
It's because it's live and we're not within the parameters of this box of this show that has these
absolutely
fairly inconsistent rules. And like there's I've spoken to a few people about that RuPaul purports himself to be a sort of a punk rocker, but is sort of in this is sort of stuck and doesn't know how to handle it. And instead of saying, you know what, I don't know everything, I'm learning, I'm figuring things out, and I come from a generation where I had a lot of really cool influence that unfortunately so much of it died. So much of it was killed by the epidemic of HIV, by hate crimes, by people not being treated well. And so he decides to forget that or disregard it while still purporting that the rest is drag, that we're all still part of this. Like he talks about how his favorite book is Animal Farm and his favorite movie is The Wizard of Oz because they're all about this community or this group finding out for themselves. And I'm like, yeah, but have you watched Wizard of Oz? Have you read Animal Farm? Because that's inconsistent.
They're not playing.
I mean, it's really sort of bizarre. It's someone who sort of doesn't get their own point. And I think instead
it's really funny. I think it's funny you should use that as an analogy because Animal Farm, it's literally a reflection and discourse about dictatorship and about how, you know, how things can go wrong if there's not appointed leadership or what can go wrong if there is.
Right. Well, he's gone on record. He's gone on record. That's his favorite.
Power.
That's his favorite book. And Wizard of Oz, about this person who really, it's like this figure that you pull back the curtain.
Oz, yeah.
It's really kind of
master of all.
Like, you couldn't plan it. You couldn't plan that kind of
I think that's just
parallel.
hysterical.
As a performer, when you're not at your own show, when you're a guest at somebody else's, or you're in a competition, or you're somewhere else other than your own playing ground, do you feel that you get a different response from people who second guess what you are, or who you or how you identify, or what's under your padding? Is that, how do you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been varied. Like, it's interesting for me because, like, there has been a few specific instances since performing in New York, and I've been performing in New York for a few years, but under a burlesque name and doing burlesque stuff, and very much in a femme identity there, and whatever, it made sense for people, so it didn't question their brain, they didn't get confused, so they rolled with it. But as a drag queen, as like a femme person, there are lots of queens that were perplexed by the fact that they couldn't clock me when I was in drag, and they didn't notice that I was a vagina-owning person, gag, until I was getting out of drag and I was getting dressed into my regular muggle clothes to roll back to Brooklyn, and they would be like, oh, I didn't realize you were a woman. And I would be like, does it fucking matter? Like, there was actually a bartender that I ran into at another drag bar who was, having a great night and was quite drunk, and was like, hey, I know you. You're the woman drag queen. And I said, I beg your pardon. He's like, I've seen you perform at Booth and Saddle before. What's your drag name? I said, Allegra Spread. He said, yeah, you're the woman drag queen. I'm like, I'd like to let you know that I'm actually non-binary, but my name is Allegra Spread, and I perform as, like a femme persona in drag. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm still learning. Thanks for letting me know. And I'm like, of course. Like, but there's literally people in my building that see me. There's like 18 floors in this building. It's huge. And there's one particular guy that's met me 3 times in 3 different drag nights. And so he saw me for the first time out of drag maybe 2 days ago at the laundromat downstairs. And he was like, oh, hey, I know you. You're the drag queen that lives upstairs. I said, yeah. And he's like, it's the first time I've seen your face. I didn't even realize that you were a woman. And I said, well, I'm actually a non-binary. And he's like, but you perform as a woman? I was like, trying to explain it. Best way is just like, and I explained to him that drag has nothing to do with gender except for the fact that it can be the exaggeration of it if that's what your character or your persona is driven by. It doesn't have to be. If you want to be a woman dressed like a lizard, if you want to be a man dressed like a man, or a man dressed like a koala, and that is your drag, then that's whatever your drag is. It's not connected to gender, and it's not ruled by it. He was like, oh, okay, cool, I learned something. And I was like, yay! Random person on the 15th floor gets it.
Now spread the message.
Their head.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunately, it's obviously the responsibility that is thrust upon you to educate others, or to defend your position, or to somehow debate. When there's not actually interested in debate. They actually just want to hear you so that they can say why it's not valid. Is
right.
Exhausting, I'm sure. So to have...
It's a lot of labor.
Yeah. So to have basically the self-proclaimed, and I mean, I think maybe not all of us voted, but I think there's something to be said that RuPaul, as sort of like the ambassador of drag for the every man or the every woman or the every person, how do you, where do you think that will somehow trickle into like this conversation that we're having based on RuPaul's comments? Does his mindset influence you? Do you feel an audience that will then come to you and maybe not quite get it? That was a lot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely. I mean, if people weren't scratching their heads before, then definitely they will be again now. I mean, there are so many people that watch the show and that are what I refer to as Ru girls, like people that are very much just obsessed with the queens that are produced by the show, and they don't really have much interest in the local queens, and it's whatever, that's their choice.
Mm-hmm.
But then this kind of thing comes up, and the people that live in the boroughs will ask and rush at local queens, but what does this mean? Like, because a lot of the time, these people that aren't actually nightlife performers aren't really aware of the struggle for trans performers and, you know, femme performers to be recognized within a field that has been taken from their literal history. So it's kind of like interesting that you should think that trans people can't be included when they built this fucking mountain. Like,
yeah, and that
their foundation.
Since RuPaul has sort of
Johnson is rolling in her fucking grave.
I know. It's sort of like, well, RuPaul has created this sort of glossy empire. Like it's sort of meant to be the best of, and to say that trans people can't be considered automatically within the best is really fucked up.
Right.
Like you're already removing them, and to say that non-binary people, because I'm sure that would be difficult, because what's sort of fascinating and frustrating, it's sort of like it's a combination of that throughout, is that RuPaul is so focused on the illusion, but still needs a part of his brain to say they have a dick. Like, it's sort of fascinating that they're so busy looking for an illusion, but refuses to also give up that part of them that says,
right.
But they need this to qualify, and it's strange. It's morbidly
really
fascinating. It's a fixation at this point.
Absolutely. The other thing that I think is particularly upsetting for this case, for Peppermint, is the fact that he doesn't count her as being a woman pre-augmentation, which is obviously bullshit, because Peppermint has identified as being as a woman for as long as she's identified as being a woman.
Yeah.
Having breast augmentation is not like a necessary
and it contributes to this
procedure for anybody who,
it contributes to this idea that you become a woman and that there's a before and after, and that's rough.
Exactly. I think that's a really old kind of way of looking at things, and I think maybe this needs to like wake up and drink his go-go juice and refresh his dictionary and maybe buy a new Webster's. Like, it's just
I know.
You know,
it's also every once in a while I'll see a comment, because obviously this has blown the hell up on our social media, which is one of the reasons that I'm doing this episode. And there are so many people that I have seen comments from, and if people don't believe me, just search them out, because I'm not creating a straw man here. They exist. Where people saying, well, then don't get mad at RuPaul for having his show, his rules. Make your own. And that's such a difficult thing to wrap your head around. It was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not quite that simple to create a multi-billion-dollar empire and also have that much lead in terms of, there are all of these, and this is something that I saw on Facebook today that was really upsetting. Somebody said that, I'm really happy to see that a lot of my queer and trans friends are, you know, and other drag queens are talking out about, you know, this RuPaul interview, but on the flip side, there are all of these cis women who are jumping right on RuPaul's bandwagon, being all like, yeah, women and trans people can't be drag queens. And I'm like, you're fucking things up for everybody. Becky, please sit down.
It's official. Now you know. I am chatting with Velvet Kensington, who is an entertainer that I work with a lot in New York City. and just coming back from Pittsburgh, and I wanted to get your perspective on a couple of things, sort of the hot topics of today. Hi, Velvet. Thanks for coming out.
Hi.
Or coming in, or calling in, or it's sort of a complicated way of putting it. If someone is unfamiliar with you, what would your dissertation be on who you are as an entertainer?
As an entertainer, I'm a anti-racist, body positive, sex positive, queer performer who I've traveled around the U.S. to perform. I usually mostly perform in queer spaces, so I'm less common in the straight spaces, more common in the queer spaces, and I do have a very heavy social media presence on Facebook and Instagram. But I am funny and I'm sexy and I love rainbows. So
it's an excellent place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, that's me.
And we just went off the record to read the tweets from earlier in the week of March 5th, and now we're going to talk about it. Thoughts?
Okay. Well, the first thing I was thinking is that RuPaul has done a lot for the drag queen community. Mm-hmm. And I say very specifically the drag queen community because we all know that she doesn't really advocate for drag kings. So I'm not going to say drag community.
Yeah, one way or another, really. Just sort of
exactly.
Come up.
Yeah. She doesn't really talk about it. She's just like, no, I'm not going to have him on my show. That's great. Cool, bye. And for whatever reasons that are. I'll also say that it's her show. Her and her producers, get to choose whatever they want to do. And she has that right. But I don't agree with the statement that she said. I also think her apologies weren't really apologies for what she said. They were more like generalized statements about, yes, I've hurt somebody, but
yeah, the word sorry wasn't used, and that's telling.
Yeah. Yeah, and for years I actually haven't watched RuPaul's Drag Race in a really long time, because of because of her lack of diversity in terms of gender expression on the actual show, in terms of just drag in general. She's her definition of drag is very specific. And I read the article and read a little bit more from The Guardian that the quote is from, and I read a little bit more about where she came from. She's struggled, and I see that and I acknowledge that, but her revolution is the revolution of the past. Her having men dress up as women, cis men dress up as women, being revolutionary is something that was revolutionary in the past, but it's not revolutionary anymore. And I feel like she doesn't understand that. She has her revolution, and then the rest of us have moved on. So
do you feel that your perspective on that is influenced by the fact that we live in this epicenter of everything under the sun? Or because they're obviously, to us, yes, I would say that it's not revolutionary on the surface. Yeah. But you get into certain places, and I would say they behave as if it's certainly revolutionary, or at the very least combative to their values or what they want. I think, and since you've said that you've not watched the last couple seasons, I will say I see, and one of the reasons this interview pisses me off so much is because I see when it is marketable and when it is a challenge that can be edited into 30 minutes and then a runway. I've seen Ru utilize androgyny and facial hair on queens, but very specifically, they still had to be very femme presenting, except for the facial hair. There have been winners, including Sasha Velour and Violet Chachki, and even as far back as Raja, that don't really concern themselves with. Violet is still very concerned with being beautiful. I would say that's on brand for her. But I would say for Sasha, beauty is beyond what is expected, and I would say for Raja, beauty isn't necessarily the most important thing either. I find all of that, and especially where Rue comes from, this sort of punk rock background and this sort of mentality that everything is drag except for this, or everything is drag and we're fighting the power, and this whole world is Animal Farm and we're going to fight. And then this seems sort of backwards. Yeah.
So going back to the question about like what the lens that I'm looking through in terms of how I see this, I've always had issues with drag queens because you're taking, not you specifically, but drag queens in general.
One does.
Drag queens in general are taking the femme presentation, which has been traditionally put on women, whether they liked it or not, and using it to excel in the world, like in the performance world, and getting paid for it. So the article that I read was specifically titled like this revolutionary idea, and I'm like, how is it revolutionary that cis men are taking what women have been doing for years and not getting paid for it, and not getting, like, except for like showgirls in the 1950s, like why is that revolutionary? You know what I mean? Like, I understand in queer culture, the drag scene was hugely revolutionary, but at the same time, looking through, I guess, my very radical in terms of the rest of the world perspective, and I don't say that as a good thing or as a bad thing, I just, as description.
It's a thing. Sure.
Yeah. Like, how is that revolutionary? Especially now. Like, how is that revolutionary? Because cis men are in control of a lot of things. And the way that it was put in the article, again, in the interview, was that I started doing this because I knew I didn't fit in, and so, like, I was expressing myself. And, yeah, that's awesome. That's performance. You know, that's performance art. That's great. But I don't see how, and this just could be my own perspective and lens, I don't see how that's revolutionary anymore.
I get it. Yeah, I mean, at the very least, I will absolutely agree with you that it shouldn't be. I am of the opinion that it shouldn't be. I am also of the opinion that if it wasn't, a lot of my career would be at stake. There's sort of that. I've spoken to a couple of burlesquers about, for example, pasties, and somebody said to me, and I'll choose to not use their name because they didn't give me clearance. Well, I understand that it's misogynistic to say that a woman can't be topless in a performance space when a man can be topless, and I understand that that's bullshit. But I also really like my pasties, and I also really like that I can do that, and I almost kind of feel uncomfortable when I'm at a show where I'm expected to be topless because I'm like, but I want to use it. And I mean, and the difference that she's describing that I'm getting is agency and decisions and someone deciding for themselves. And I understand that drag is predominantly, even still, at least predominantly viewed as cisgender men choosing what is feminine and choosing what is hyper-feminine. I get that. I absolutely get it. Especially in an era that is at the most social media-wise and entertainment-wise and cell phone-wise, so many things telling women that they're not either good enough or even bare minimum women.
Yeah.
And I understand the problem of that. I also see men who are treated that they are somehow not men because of the way that they behave or the way that they act, that this is their armor, and it's it's a really fascinating concept. Drag is so much deeper than I think a lot of what people think it is. But gender expression and everything, it's really sort of that's let's just talk all night under the stars about stuff. That's a lot. And I don't necessarily want to get into all of that with you at the moment. But when you have as an entertainer and as a performer, do you consider your high femininity when you choose to do that, when you choose to represent that? Do you consider that drag? Do you use that expression?
I usually use a different persona.
Okay.
I have in the past played around with the term drag, but it doesn't feel genuine and authentic to me because I have always had this slightly part in my soul, and I haven't followed as many drag stars, and I don't know the history, and I don't want to try and claim that I'm this drag star and I know everything, you know what I mean? I feel like people, it's like cultural appropriation basically, but not as big as a problem. But just in terms
it's at
of
least
my
inauthentic for you.
Yeah, it feels inauthentic. It's it just feels inauthentic because drag is not necessarily where my intention comes from. So it's weird.
How do you feel when people who identify as women or identify as non-binary but are perceived as women, how do you feel about performers who refer to themselves as drag queens then?
The what? Are we talking about drag queens like Crimson Kitty and?
Sure. Either, sometimes they use terms like lady queen, sometimes they use hyper queen or femme queen, and sometimes just drag queen. How do you feel about that?
I am all for it. I'm please capitalize on this thing that has been used. You know what I mean? Yes, do it, please. It almost feels like a reclaiming to me because it's
absolutely,
all these people these men have been doing this, and so that's what I am all for. That I'm all for everybody doing whoever wants to do drag should do drag. And my personal definition of this, just so it kind of cements a little bit more from the conversation that we've been having, is drag to me is any super extreme version of a gender expression. You could do drag kings, for example, they do super masculinity, regardless of what that looks like to them, because it's going to be different on different people. Absolutely. But then the same with the opposite of drag queens. So it's it's just that.
Right.
It's
absolutely. I mean, at least in New York, if you want to see a wide variety of people who use the term drag king, something like Beef Show in Brooklyn is an excellent example of how, yes, they're all using this term, but they all come from different walks and they all come from different identities, and some of them when they wear the mustache or they wear the grease paint, they are one thing, and then they are not when they go home, and then the other. It's just an addition to what they already are. And another example would be switch and play, and I think these are really important spaces to explore that and to have an audience see that reflected.
Yeah. I mean, even your show, you dabble with it or petrified.
I do my best to include it. Well, because I sort of feel, and I don't want to make this about my mission statement, but I sort of feel that I don't want to do what RuPaul is doing. right, which is tell people who can and cannot in a sweeping term. I can tell you who can't be in my show, but they're going to be specific people. And I can tell you what's not going to work for me, but it's going to be specific things. And I can say, I don't want to book that, but it's going to be because of a specific aspect. It's not going to be some sweeping generalization because I don't want to go through the paperwork.
Right.
Like that's too much. I can say comfortably that I don't want kiddie pools full of Jell-O. I can say comfortably I don't want a whole lot of fire.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I gotta say every individual of different talent, of different skill set, of different intention, and also how they are backstage and how they conduct themselves and how much I really want to deal with them and how genuine I can be when I introduce them about how happy I am that they're at my show. That's the only criteria, really.
Yeah.
And to be perfectly honest, I'm also aware that not everything is intended for me. So I have to book outside of my interest. Because if I didn't, well, then I'd be the only one entertained.
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, I love to be entertained. But I also want people to come to my show. And I think that Rue is honestly doing my BFF Rue. I'm talking all casual with him. But Rue is really sort of doing a disservice, and I get the apology, and I get that he didn't say sorry, but I get the, I don't know, I get the addendum, I'll put it that way, to his interview. But the interview is what got published.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's going to happen is that people are going to respond to that and then somehow have to know because someone in the comments is going to tell them that, but he wrote a tweet. Well, this isn't a scavenger hunt, people. Like I don't want to have to make sure that I'm up on my information when a day after the interview is published, he decided to tweet something.
Right, exactly.
And say nothing about that it was out of context. He never said anything like that. He's saying, well, he's readjusting.
It's like, yes, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but and I mean the other thing that kind of gets me a little bit about Rue is that because drag queens have been more in the mainstream, this is what little drag folks, people in like smaller towns are seeing, and now they're expecting their drag experience to be like Rue. Now, there's an adverse side to that too. There's at least they know that they're out there, but then there's the other side, like, is this what I'm supposed to be like if I'm a drag queen? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and there are examples of even in the show, of people discussing that and talking about being true to their drag, and invariably they say that and then go home. But it does happen. It does come up. And then again, we do have some success stories out of it as well. It's basically RuPaul has sort of made himself the least important person on that show. And that it's the individual casts or the guest judges or the challenges or the outfits that the queens do that become iconic.
Right.
And it's sort of like they're being involved in like this old style game show, and at least they're the stars. And if anyone wonders why I still watch it or why I still am entertained by it, it is that. It is that.
Yeah.
It's partially because I can look at it with sort of a that's not quite what I would have done sort of behavior as well. Or, that's not quite the language I would have used. Or,
which is always validating.
And you know what? Yeah. And why not? People watch things that piss them off all the time. A lot of good is in this. It's just that there needs to be, I think, if this show has expressed it, it's that, well, if you don't like American Idol, you have The Voice, or you have America's Got Talent, or you have this, or you have this. We need another Drag Race.
Yeah.
And that's so much easier said than done.
Yeah. I've been like, in the back of my brain, I've been like, well, if you don't see what you want to see, you got to make it. And I'm like, oh, how could I do that? I have no money, but I know a lot of people.
And I've thought the same thing with burlesque. I mean, the one thing I've said this to some folk, that burlesque is still more underground than drag, because drag has T-shirts. And burlesque, it doesn't have a competition show. I mean, God help us if it ever did. Oh, God. It would create war. It would create war. You think drag queens have had fights over how representation is in drag? Just you wait, Henry Higgins, on that burlesque show. But the idea of one style versus another, it's because it's so adjacent to sex work, or it's so adjacent to female empowerment, or it's so adjacent to accepting the body. Where do you get sponsors for that?
Yeah, nowhere.
So it's rough. There eventually, yes, there will be. Of course, there will be a So You Think You Can Burlesque. Yes, at one point there will be, and it will be a mess and a half, and I will probably watch it.
I will be on it as a judge.
Well, I thank you for chatting with me.
No problem.
I want to do before we say goodbye, I do want to say if there is any places in your surrounding areas that you want to give a shout out to for being inclusive or inviting to the community that may not feel invited to this aspect, for you to have an opportunity to do that.
Oh, like a shout out to people?
Sure. Or places that you like, or venues that you think are cool, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, there's the WOW Cafe Theater that does that has hypergender cabaret and burlesque. There's Brooklyn Arts Exchange, which we have queer artists. It's called Needing It. It's like a queer performance artist class, basically, or workshop, where you'll workshop a certain piece of, or like an act that you're doing, and then produce it or show it at the end of the class. Unfortunately, I think that the group has already been selected, but it happens every year. Of course, I could go on to DC places too. So there's Pretty Boy Drag, which is a mostly POC drag king troupe. I'm not sure if they have any queens, but I know they have a huge group and a huge following. They like sell out brunch venues. They have a drag brunch. They're just amazing, and they're all gorgeous, of course. But that's a bias because I love all drag kings.
That's quite all right.
All drag kings. Yeah. Then there's DC Girly Show, which when I started with them, they were all for different sizes, different colors, different races, different religions, whatever, sex positive. And then there's Glitter Bomb in Dallas, Texas. There's Boys of Austin, Texas. Who else am I forgetting? They're the Red Hots Burlesque in San Francisco. Yeah, Dottie Luck. She's a gem. She's a gem. And then who else? I feel like and then there's a huge scene in Seattle. Like Al Lick is there. Just there are people all over. You just have to find them. And Fierce Burlesque Festival and Texas Queerlesque Festival. There we go.
Excellent.
They're all
Velvet's list right there. I appreciate it.
This call is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect at this time.
So I'm speaking with Morgana Regina in
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
So we worked together actually a little while ago at the Pittsburgh
Yes, International Queer Burlesque Festival, yes.
And we saw a great deal of queer entertainers and queer artists doing their thing. Now, as you know, I'm doing a little bit of a roundtable discussion with several performers who identify as drag queens, but perhaps may have a comment or two in response to the most recent article that RuPaul has been interviewed for, which sort of, I would say, discounts an entire segment of the drag population.
Right.
So how do you identify, if I may ask?
I identify as a assigned female at birth. I identify as a female, and I perform as a drag queen.
Now, when you perform as a drag queen, a lot of times, and I find this happens a lot in New York, there's a lot of interest in adding a adjective or an additional noun to the words before drag queen. Do you do that, or do you just...
Yes, I do stay away from bio queen because I do want to have more inclusivity, especially for my trans family. So I use hyperfemme.
Okay.
I use ultra femme, another word. So it's just basically heightened femininity,
right?
Which is what I believe I do and what I believe drag queens do. It's heightened femininity.
At least a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's totally all the gamut in between there. But what I feel like I do, I like to be an aggressive female. So I am very powerful on stage. I am very dominant on stage. So I do a lot of gender fuckery?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I really play with the concept of, like, you know what, I am a woman. I'm proud to be a woman. But I also don't need to be boxed into what everyone or the society deems as what is feminine or female or what a woman is. Like, I can play with masculine concepts and still look like fishy, you know?
What style or inspiration or reference points do you as a drag queen have?
I am inspired. Well, Morgana definitely comes from the Celtic goddess of war. So she's a badass bitch. She basically takes all dominance and power and says, I can be a woman and I can be aggressive and assertive and take charge. And she will never perform a song where she's saying, I'm sorry. Because there's no apologies in her performances. It is very about womanhood, femininity, being, like, I'm also a plus size woman, so I'm very comfortable being out there, and if I, doing burlesque, also getting more naked, and just saying, like, I can be in my own skin and be whoever I want to be, and still be proud of my femininity, no matter what size I look like or how I'm coming off. So I do a lot of manifestations in terms of predators. Like, women should be seen as, society shows women as, like, meek and mild, and I'm like, no, I want to be a woman who's a predator. I want to be a woman who's strong. I want to be a woman who's a dominatrix. I want to be a woman who is a witch, so all my characters are some kind of powerful woman that I'm trying to showcase to the audience, that says, here I am. You can't be afraid of me, or you must fear me. That's another way. You must fear me and get out of my way, because I'm going to. I'm going to take over the world, and I'm going to show you in this performance. So that's usually what I try to manifest in different kinds of characters in my performance art.
Now, what would you say is your first introduction as opposed to your second introduction? What do you think was your first awareness of drag queens as an identity and as a type of performance art?
Oh my gosh. Probably junior college, right after high school. I was in the theater arts program, and so I got to see a lot of variety of performers. And I think that was around the time that RuPaul started his drag race. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be a drag queen. How do I do? And I remember specifically being in my theater stage makeup class, and we had like a free assignment, and I was like, I'm going to make myself look like a drag queen. And no one was doing that. Like, that was unheard of. And I was like, no, I want to change the shape of my face to look like a drag queen, like a man looking to look like a woman.
Right.
So, and I still have pictures of it to this day. I kind of want to post it on social media.
I mean, there have been other performers. World famous Bob is a very good example of someone from the neo-burlesque revolution, as it were, from the 90s, when they identified as a drag queen first, before they started stripping, before they started emceeing burlesque shows. She says in a documentary that when she was first putting on drag, she would intentionally use makeup to androgynize herself to make it look that she was a woman as a man, as a woman, or whatever, and that was as part of the game of it, part of the shtick.
Exactly. But during that time, there was no space. Like I only saw RuPaul's Drag Race on whatever platform I watched it on at that time, and I didn't see any women or anybody else besides a gay man doing drag. So I was like, oh, okay. So I would like go to my little gay clubs dressed what I thought like looking like a drag queen, but there was no space for it. People were like, "You're weird. You're just wearing a wig."
So
and some eyelashes.
Your response to it was less than positive, or they just sort of
it wasn't necessarily negative, it just wasn't acknowledged.
Okay.
Like it was just like, oh, okay, we don't know who you are and what you're doing. I started playing around it again, that was probably 10 years ago.
Okay. And did you jump right into
more than 10 years ago. I want to say 15 years ago.
And did you jump right into being a professional, or did you?
No, I didn't. I actually took a whole different side life and pursued a different educational career for a long time. And then once I graduated and I started living my life and trying to find out what made me happy, I still had that performance artist inside of me. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I want to be a drag queen, but I don't know how that's possible. So I found burlesque. And I was like, well, burlesque people still can get up on stage and wear fancy things and entertain people. And I was like, well, I guess that's the space I need to be in as a woman.
So you
I just have to be a burlesque performer.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only option I thought I had. And then I started, doing more research and finding like, oh my gosh, there's other people like me.
What's interesting is that you felt, I mean, from what I'm getting from your story, is that you felt welcomed to do drag from what you saw, or you felt emboldened to do drag from what you saw on RuPaul's Drag Race. And what's happening right now is you're basically being told that you're the wrong fit for RuPaul's Drag Race.
Yeah, that I don't belong in that space.
And I mean, where do you feel? I don't want to speak for you, but is there a response that you have to that?
Well, I'm kind of frustrated because I am welcomed in my community here in Pittsburgh, and I feel great, and I feel alive, and I feel happy. For the first time in my life, I'm doing drag on stage and living my best life. I love it. And then I hear my idol. I love RuPaul. I'm thankful for RuPaul. He's created a lot of paths for entertainers, and I will never speak bad of him. I just disagree. And so I'm just frustrated because I was like, oh, man, you taught me all the things. I learned from you, and now I can't be in your club. This is really sad. Why?
Yeah. It's. I think what I find really, really frustrating by it is that Ru doesn't come from that mindset in terms of their history. He obviously comes up through, most people would associate it with the ball scene, although he doesn't come up through the ball scene, but he certainly takes advantage of using terminology from the ball scene, because he was really more genderfuck, more gender non-conforming when he started drag. And to him,
and like in all of his articles also, like it just doesn't make sense because he says so much of this inclusivity talk, but then he says, but, not on my show.
Which is also odd because he has had performers who have not fit that sort of mindset. We've had Milk, we've had Sasha, we've had Violet, Raja, who have all played with what quote unquote makes a woman, and then you also have people like Trinity Taylor or other performers who, at least Trinity I know has gone on record that they have had procedures. I don't know about anybody else. I don't want to step out of line.
Well, I believe Carmen Carrera was the first person that was outwardly trans.
But not on the show.
And that was the person. Not on the show. No, after the show. After the show. Yeah,
and in fact,
absolutely.
After Carmen came out and discussed some of the topics that were problematic on the show, RuPaul has all but completely disavowed her. Every once in a while, she'll come up because they'll do one of those the repeats of her season, and Ru will have like the little pop-up video commentaries. He says almost nothing about Carmen, and I think that he views Carmen's comments as something as a betrayal, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing that infuriates me, especially as an advocate of the trans community, is like there is no conversation where you say before or after a show. Like that vocabulary needs to be shut down. They were a woman this entire time. They just transitioned outwardly.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how people transition, if they transition, but if they feel like a woman on the inside, that's how they should be identified. And so the conversation should never, ever, ever be, well, before or after the show.
Right. Absolutely.
And where they were in life. Like, that's ridiculous.
And that's, I think, where the frustration is with Peppermint, who's just coming off that show. And we're hearing that had she not made decisions before the show started airing, she wouldn't have been considered, which means she was capable to top four.
I would like to ask RuPaul, what makes a drag queen, according to RuPaul? What
I think we
makes
know.
a drag queen?
I think we know, and it's unfortunate that it's so easy to sum up. It's someone who honestly is marketable, but is a cisgender man. At the very least, I think Ru has a concept that everyone is a drag person, but for his show, he decides, well, everyone has to start evenly. Everyone has to start on the same starting line, and that anyone who has made modifications to themselves or identifies in a certain way or doesn't fit isn't starting out at the same level. And the reason I find that frustrating is because you look at any season and they're all at different starting points.
Yep.
It's really it's really frustrating.
And a lot of his comments, he says, like, well, it's this, we're trying to do this ironic concept of messing with gender. And I'm like, well, I do the same thing. I want to bring back feminine power. And what better way to impersonate a woman than an actual woman? I kind of know what I'm doing. Like, well, watch me. Let me show you.
Now, you said you've had very positive experiences as a drag performer in Pittsburgh, but do you feel that Ru's mindset somehow reflects either queer society or your audiences in any way?
I don't believe it will affect the Pittsburgh community. Now, I'm sure that I can't speak for the entire Pittsburgh community, but in the venues and bars and that I've been performing at, I feel very welcomed and open. And yeah, we are a small group of AFAB drag performers in Pittsburgh. There's probably like a handful of us. So we're getting out there more. So I think it's about exposure right now and showing people that we can do this too. But I haven't had any negative feedback in terms of Pittsburgh. Now, I have no clue. I haven't been to other places and done drag either. So
yeah, you can only speak to your own experiences. I understand.
Yeah, so I hope that this is, I mean, all my social media feeds are agreeing with this concept in terms of supporting trans and biological women pursuing drag. So I hope that speaks of the greater community, that it's more welcoming than RuPaul's idea.
I think it would be really, really neat, although perhaps still frustrating, if Ru were to, like, say, see, I only said this to start the conversation, and I just wanted to see that, see, it is valid, it wouldn't that be great, but it would be a long con. It would be a long
My
con.
gut tells me he will probably change his mind.
I think if the money tells him to. If the money tells him to, he might. Yeah.
And that could be controlled by people who disagree with him. So, I mean, I know that Dragula, the competition show, is going to be more open and accepting. So there is another venue that people can go to if they don't want to support RuPaul.
I mean, that's the thing also. Trans performers in drag and in burlesque and in performance are, I recently spoke to a New York performer, Lou Alfred Douglas, about this topic. He is a trans artist who is very passionate about making sure, not just reclaiming history, but making it aware that history never went away. It's not a matter of oh, well, now everyone's trans or now everyone's gender nonconforming. No, people just have voices now, and they now.
I mean, how many people during the Stonewall were actually trans women performing as drag queens? How many? Like
a very large percentage that we boiled down to 2 or 3 because those are the names that have stuck with us. But I think it's important to be out there and be visible, and I appreciate that you're out there doing what you're doing. If someone were to be in Pittsburgh and want to check out inclusive performance work that they can't get out of Drag Race, where would you recommend them checking out?
Ooh, well, I can tell you that I am a part of a burlesque troupe that does do variety shows called the Velvet Hearts, and we are a queer-friendly group. And I've actually, I think I am the first hyper femme in the troupe.
Okay.
So I'm excited to present that into our audience. And then also just a lot of the local bars that put on drag shows, where a few of us girls have been trying to get out and do more open stages and ask producers if they want to include us in their shows. So, any Thursday, Tuesday, Monday, anywhere from P-Town to Brewers to Blue Moon. We've got femme queens out there.
If you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect at this time.
It's very official sounding, right?
That is very official sounding.
Okay, so 9 hours ago, Ru posted, "You can take performance-enhancing drugs and still be an athlete, just not in the Olympics."
Oh, my God.
I know. All right.
Is that supposed to be an apology?
No. That was first. I'm just giving you context.
Okay.
And then 3 hours ago, posted, "Each morning, I pray to set aside everything I think I know, so that I may have an open mind and a new experience. I understand and regret the hurt I've caused. The trans community are heroes of our shared LGBTQ movement. You are my teachers." And in a separate post, wrote, "In the 10 years we've been casting Drag Race, the only thing we've ever screened for is charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, and that will never change." And I happen to know that is somewhat inaccurate because at least in the first several seasons they asked if you were a man or a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently it was like Christian Mingle. If you said you were not what they wanted, you immediately stopped. Like you couldn't say, So that seems a little disingenuous, I'll say.
Yes.
But,
I mean, I wish I could say it's a little like none of this situation. The worst part about it for me, anyway, it's not even a surprise. It's just continuing disappointment of this person that's supposed to represent everything that the art form that I love more than anything in the whole world represents. And it's both disappointing, irritating, a little disgusting, and but overall, it's just not a surprise, which is why it hurts so much, I think.
Now, I'll give you a clean intro, and then we'll dive right in. I am sitting here chatting with Mr. Leave Alone, who has many titles and distinctions, one of which is that he is an entertainer in Brooklyn, New York. He is of the House of Velour, yes, that Velour, and is the curator of several fabulous shows in Brooklyn, probably the crowning jewel to many of them, to many people, is Beef Show. And I'm sitting here. I am actually on the West Coast, and Lee is on the East Coast. So even though I normally see this charming fellow, I don't know, 5 times a month or more, I'm getting my fix all this distance away. So hi, Lee.
Hi, Victor. That's a very kind introduction.
Well, it is to no stranger of this podcast that I think very fondly of you. You've come up multiple times because they view your shows as a place that is welcoming, that is what they don't necessarily feel welcome to being or seeing or represents them on what is, I think, for most people, the most readily accessible channel to drag, which is VH1's conglomerate empire, RuPaul's Drag Race. And you obviously have a personal connection to Drag Race, as your drag mother is the winner of season 9, Sasha Velour. And Sasha, for a lot of people, changed the game as they viewed it, because even if they saw gender nonconformity, or they saw ugly pretty drag, or they saw sophisticated challenges to drag, or what that ends up meaning, Sasha was a clear-cut winner, and is still, I don't know, waving that flag around Nightgowns, which is their show, as well as any show that they are also a part of. How do you, as an entertainer who is a trans performer and is a trans person, how do you handle putting your head around the complicated feelings you may have about RuPaul's Drag Race?
Well, for me, I mean, anytime that someone comes up to me and starts talking about drag, inevitably they ask about, either how I got started, or what were my influences, or how did I find out about drag. And for me, my first experiences with really getting, nose deep into drag was through RuPaul's Drag Race. I started, when I moved to New York, I was deeply miserable, so I watched a lot of Netflix, and I plowed through every season. This was when they were still available on Netflix. I even, torrented season 1 off of the deep web and watched that. And so my roots, when it really boils down to it, my roots for drag experiences was by watching this show and by watching this entertainer that, is a deeply problematic individual and a deeply problematic icon, even though he's still an icon. Once I started participating in drag more and started really doing my research, I mean, when RuPaul first started, he was a very gender-fucked performer. He had this mohawk, and, he was very punk, and, didn't build his body with pads and all these things, so he he read more of a masculine queen drag, and to see, you know, his evolution, and, you know, that's all very natural and everyone's drag changes, but to know that his politics didn't keep up with his views of the world around him. I mean, the world is changing, and the queer community is changing and becoming what it's always been, but more in the open. I mean, it's always been a spectrum of presentation and gender and sexuality and all of these other beautiful things. It's now just in the open. Everyone knows that gender and queerness are huge multitudes of identities, but RuPaul chose to not keep up with his vocabulary and his politics. And I wish I could say it was surprising. I wish I could say I was shocked when I read this interview, but the main thing is I wasn't. I was disappointed, just like everyone else, and, you know, felt a little let down, but it wasn't a surprise. He said some very problematic things in the past, and up until this point, when performers or producers like myself would bring up these issues, people would say, oh, that was a long time ago. He obviously has updated. Look, he had Peppermint on the show. Yeah. Peppermint is doing, you know, all these wonderful things in drag. RuPaul is accepting of the trans community. And then this interview happens, and now we just have a new bookmark on our phones to look at and say, no, really, these are his views. And now that I've heard his not apology released today, I'm still just as disappointed. It's you know, it's time to change your vocabulary. It's time to change. It's time for him to change his vocabulary, and it's time for him to change his cultural vocabulary, and understand that drag no longer belongs to cis men, and it never did in the first place. So what I'm interested in is an apology for thinking that it ever belonged to anyone. Yeah. But I doubt we'll ever get that. And
it's so lopsided. I mean, despite the fact that, yes, Rue is ignoring trans drag queens like Calpurnia Adams and Amanda Lepore and even cultural touchstones that we don't usually, I mean, at this point, we don't usually refer to Marsha P. Johnson as a drag queen. Right. She was an activist more than she was known as an entertainer. So, but it is interesting that Rue has constantly and consistently referenced Marsha on Drag Race, but says, and remember, a drag queen threw the first brick. And it's an interesting sort of specific way of phrasing. It's oddly exclusionary because it doesn't necessarily use terminology that people feel that I think a number of people would feel appropriate for Marsha. Admittedly, Marsha unlikely ever used the word trans because that word was not commonplace until, I don't know, the 90s or so. Right. But as someone who is viewed by a lot of us as like the preeminent drag queen, the most famous drag queen, it is a little rough. It feels like one of those times when somebody quotes that age-old phrase that you either die early enough to be the hero or you live long enough to be the villain. It right. smacks of, oh, damn.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the perfect analogy. Like RuPaul, 10 years ago could have read a damn book and just really did some soul searching and thought about these things, this world that he's involved in. And I can't shake my anti-capitalist views, and I can't shake, my own politics, so maybe I'm biased what I'm about to say. But money changes people. And I think that RuPaul now does not have to change his point of view because he's got the money and he doesn't have to. And I think that the only thing that will change his mind is money, And I think that the not apology we received today probably came about because the fans were upset. And, you know, the fans are upset. I'm upset, and I'm not even a fan of his. I'm a fan of the work, and I'm a fan of the girls on the show, those who identify by that label. And all of them, but, you know, anyway.
The folks.
But it's like, it's just so disappointing when someone that has that much influence and that level, for lack of a better word, of control of this world chose to not update. And it made a choice to ignore facts and ignore history and ignore, you know, these conversations that the community as a whole has had. And frankly has ignored a lot of talent. And it's totally and completely inexcusable and obnoxious that, to me, someone's value as a performer and as an artist solely depends on the status of their genitals. And that is rude. It's also very rude.
It is. It is. And it's odd when your focus is, illusion. Oh, but in the back of my head, I got to make sure that you conform to this. It's odd. Like, unless you're, quote unquote, hiding something, then it doesn't count. And that's an odd prerequisite. It's a fixation.
It also goes back to, yes, absolutely. And it also goes back to me, this idea that one can only be transgressive if one is hiding something or if one is going against something. So that really bothers me because, for my experience, I am a trans non-binary person. I identify on the masculine end of the spectrum. I use he, him pronouns. And just to simplify my life and those around me, I prefer to be called a man. Because in my mind, there aren't very many good men, and I want to be a good man. If I can
be
good
to
one,
have you
I will
in that list. Yeah, I feel that. I will happily occupy that space because there aren't enough good men, and I identify masculine, even though I don't identify as any gender particularly. But if one wanted to assign me one just for the sake of conversation and just to make life a little easier, man is fine. Right. So for me, when I have two drag personas, but the one that I favor, Leave Alone, when I am in Leave Alone drag, I am my truest self. I am me. I'm wearing a lot of makeup, but this is me. This is who I am. And by saying the only way you can do drag is to be someone you are not, invalidates everything that I do. And it's maddening because it's just maddening because I work so hard to do what I do, and I am very good at it. That's not something I let myself say out loud very often, but I'll say it. You're very good at it.
Conversation.
I'll say it. I'll say it right now.
Well, you know, I just, I am. And by saying, well, what you're doing is actually not good enough because you're not hiding anything. Yeah. It's just very rude and very obnoxious. And I wish I was upset, but mostly I'm just disappointed because it's just more of the same. And I am very, very interested in the opinions of a lot of the RuPaul participants that are legally not allowed to comment. I would be very, very interested to know what Sasha has to say, which I'm sure I will hear about and will not be at liberty to share. But I really appreciate Peppermint's emoji tweet that it was just a sad face, a crying face, and then a zipper face or something along those lines. Because she didn't break contract, but her message was loud and clear. Yeah. And I
will say, Ben de la Creme did tweet today.
Oh, yes.
Saying,
already being like, fuck you!
Ben's tweet is, my partner of almost 3 years is trans, and hashtag Ben de la Christ, help anyone who tries to tell him what he can and can't do. Just saying. And, I mean, not only is that someone who is obviously on the top of everyone's mouth when it comes to Drag Race because of last week, which I've already had a spoiler alert that Ben de la Creme chose to leave the show last week.
Yes.
And I think what's really interesting, and I haven't delved into with anyone because I've been mostly focusing on the reaction to how do you feel to be invalidated, for lack of a better word. But in terms of the RuPaul concept, sort of the shakiest ground that it's been on since season 1, the fact that the clear top 3, I'll say it, probably winner of All Stars 3, chose to leave at the height of their game because they just couldn't bear to be on that show anymore is extraordinarily telling. And I think that accidentally coupled, because who knows how long ago that Guardian interview was, but that accidentally coupled on the weekend of that revelation, it's and on a show where we're seeing less and less of the runway, we're seeing less and less of the individual challenges, we're spending more time with them going back and forth. We had a half hour dedicated to them talking about how mad they were at who sent them home. Like we had a half hour dedicated to them sitting at a table talking and yelling at each other. Just this creation of this what was a queer show for queer people is now a circus act, more or less, and it can't be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. Not to go back on my
please do.
anarcho soapbox, but it's something that I think about constantly is this industrial complex of drag that has been created by the brand RuPaul.
RuPaul
when
Co.
you're looking at the RuPaul
he
Co.
actually owns it. It's actually a RuCo.
It's like the RuPaul Skynet of it all. It's just it's really, really disappointing to me that my Instagram feeds are full of enthusiastic fans that don't truly understand the toll that's being taken on these participants and don't go to local drag shows. And they couldn't name 5 local queens if they tried, and they certainly couldn't name a king or a non-binary performer. It's just watching this art form because of this more or less one person become a consumable good.
Yeah.
And I think it would be naive of me to say that RuPaul's Drag Race has not directly benefited me and my scene. Of course it has. I've directly benefited from, this industrial drag complex because of, my drag family. Like, I mean, I'm not actively involved in the velour business sense or whatever, but Sasha's a very dear friend of mine, and all, a rising tide raises all boats. I mean, so just it's so disappointing to me that this art form that I love so very much, this storytelling medium, has been bastardized in this way. And I just it's so disappointing. It's just so disappointing. And it really goes back to, what stories are we telling in drag? And right now, the RuPaul's Drag Race story is a story of exclusion, meanness, dividing communities, and in a lot of ways, breaking people. Like, I find it very humanizing when these queens talk about, I haven't been to my home in 2 months, or my partner broke up with me because they didn't see me for 3 months, or the main ones that always get me are, I haven't seen my dog in 2 weeks. I can't handle the toll that these performers are taking because of this like constant need to create content and be in shows and photo shoots and the commercial opportunities. And I mean, I can't fault them because this is a job, and if the money's there, you got to take it while you can. But it's just the toll that's being taken on them. And it's all Rue's fault. All of it. The good, the bad, the ugly. It's all Rue's fault. But the blatant, like, disrespect of the history and invalidating everything Peppermint did on that season. Oh my God. I can't. It's a lot.
I posted on Facebook yesterday that I left it fairly succinct. And I said that, hang on, let me get it so I have it properly. I said, if you feel drag doesn't belong to trans people, take those Paris is burning quotes out of your mouth. And I didn't necessarily expect that to, like, blow up, but it's been shared a lot of times. I got a lot of comments for it, and cool. Thank you to everyone. And I hope that at the very least, every time it's shared, somebody else says, "Yeah, oh wait," like there's at least a moment of realization that keeping in mind that even Paris is Burning, which has its own problematic aspects, and is still full of life and is still full of stories that were edited by someone else, not a part of that culture, and was distributed by folks not necessarily concerned with protecting the people that are in the documentary. It's still a snapshot, and it still has truth in it. And for someone like RuPaul to universalize the messages or the phrases or the commentary, to just like where to such a point where if I hear somebody say like, "Oh, she burnt up a mink coat," I know exactly where that's from. Like I know exactly, and that's not a quotable. That's just a line somebody said in their lives that's on film. And to have someone who has brought that who has helped bring that film to to several generations of people who did not know their foreparents in this life, and then to sort of not be consistent with it, I was like, well, then what was the point of shining a light on it?
Yeah,
I don't quite get it. And what's the point of talking and doing Drag You, where you're treating your drag queens, not your friends, not your staff, your drag queens, just your drag queens, and telling them that they are there to make more or less acceptable cisgender people, women, into something fabulous because that's what your function is. It's odd. It's a weird sort of, well, if something's going to co-opt us, then I might as well get there first kind of thing.
Right. The thing that I try my best to keep in mind about RuPaul is he's a businessman.
Yeah.
And if you look throughout his entertainment history, you know, he's done a little bit of everything because at the time, that's what would pay the bills or get the money in. And
he still does.
You know, oh, he absolutely still does. And it's really, for him, I do believe he cares about the art form. I mean, I feel like you can't do the extent of drag that he does if you don't care. Like he does, I mean, you wouldn't if you didn't care. But he knows there's money in what he's doing, and he does what he feels is most marketable at the time. It's why they switched from Logo to VH1. It's why, you know, the guest judges, you know, keep getting a little bit better or a little edgier or whatever. And I definitely think it's why last season we had the beautiful, perfect, no flaws angel Sasha Velour, who won the Weird Queen, the artsy queen, won Drag Race. And this season, I love all those girls. I'm sure they're all beautiful, perfect snowflakes. They're cookie cutters. They're all gorgeous, regular-ass drag queens. And I feel like that was on purpose. And I just, and that's not to discount anyone's drag. That's not to discount any of them as people. I'm sure they're all lovely in their own ways. I'm actually extremely unfamiliar with everyone on this season. I don't know any of them personally, and I don't know any of their drag.
I've seen Mayhem. Mayhem Miller is a California queen. So I saw her now that my husband's in California. I've seen her now that I've been here.
Okay. And Sash had someone on nightgowns. Oh, I've already forgotten who, because I was running around with like a chicken with my head cut off because I was running merch table. But I saw the performance and it was lovely. But it's just, there aren't any bald Judith Butler quoting queens. There aren't any burlesque Bendelas. It's just drag. And that's a really hard thing to say out of my with my voice, is like, it's just drag. And for me, drag is, it's so many beautiful things. It's storytelling, it's costuming, it's textiles, it's movement, it's dance, it's acting, it's all these different things. But above all, it's just a person on a stage or not showing you what they want to say. It's not so much just telling you. It's not just like putting something on the wall. It's their body showing you what is inside of them on the outside, or in singing, or in poetry, or whatever. But it's always gender performance with intentionality. And I feel like RuPaul is an asshole, and we all know this. And he's not going to take drag from us. So it's annoying and it's disappointing, but I got a little frustrated while we were talking. But I'm not angry, because it's not a shock. And drag does not belong to RuPaul nor his brand. It belongs to the collective of all local scenes. But it belongs to the local scenes.
Yeah.
It belongs to
What are some of the examples of drag that you would love to see represented on a wider platform? Keeping in mind that a wider platform sometimes can, affect the intimacy of something. And I understand that everything has its own space, but if we were able to somehow bring versions of drag that have not been represented in this Malibu beach house of a variety show, and which, don't get me wrong, it looks fabulous, but to extend it or to give more credence to existing drag, what do you feel is that you would love to see represented, that you want more people to know about, that you would love people to see?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh my gosh. I want
so many things.
I want all the things, Victor. Can I have all the things? No, I have a list. If you'll just, I want to see Hyper Queen that is 5 foot even, that doesn't wear heels on Drag Race. I want to see a drag king with triple E breasts that doesn't put them away, in a full beard and a fantastic tuxedo on Drag Race. I want to see a non-binary individual in the most glamorous outfit they have ever constructed by hand, reading poetry on RuPaul's Drag Race. I want to see, I don't know. I want to see pain on RuPaul's Drag Race. I want to see someone get on stage and talk about like something that hurt them, or a heartbreak, or a parent passing, or an accident they had, without the intention of getting an emotional response from the judges so that they stay. I want someone to bleed their heart on stage and have the judges look at them and say thank you for that, and not feel like it's, oh, now I have to keep you around because I feel sorry for you. I want someone to get a little deeper. I want the content to be deeper. I want the fucking looks to stop being purchased always. I mean, I'm a designer. I'm a wig designer. I'm a costume designer, and I love when people pay me for my work. But I'm tired. I'm so tired of the winner of the pageant is the one that can spend the most on a gown and a wig. I want people to have equal playing fields as far as money with the show. I want I want to see more than one type of face. I want to see people that identify as that say I am doing drag, but they don't look like anything we've ever seen because they're just them. Like a few, like for example, at Bizarre Bushwick, there's we have my shows, we have the Fuck You Review, we have Hardcore, we have A+, we have all of these really amazing things that are drag, burlesque, sideshow, hybrids, but for me, all of these things encompass my definition of drag, which is just a performance of a gender or not gender on a stage with the intention of sharing something. And I don't know how all of that could possibly be in a show. Maybe a miniseries. Maybe I don't know.
Maybe a network.
Maybe a network. Well, honestly, you want to talk money? I would pay good money for that network. I think for me, what I would encourage other people to do, and this is the true bane of my existence, but just share your work. Like, put it on Instagram, put it on Facebook. Like, show everyone what you're doing. Show your process. Show, just get vulnerable, I guess is the main thing I'd like to see on shows like this. I would love to see more internet series, and I would love to see more small budget drag competitions like Dragula. Dragula is I mean, it's a niche, it's a horror drag experience. It's so far they haven't had a hyper queen or a drag king, but the Boulet brothers have been loud and excited about their audition process, and they say, we don't care what you do, just nail the audition. We want kings, queens, hyper queens, anything you got, let's see it. If you pass the audition, we'll have you. And there's those two performers have been so vocal about their support for cis women and non-binary individuals in the drag scene, whatever performance they're doing, king, queen, dragon, whatever. I want to see more, because the fact is, what RuPaul is presenting at this point, we have seen, and I'm bored. It's getting boring. It's turning into America's Next Top Model season 22 or whatever. And that's not to knock America's Next Top Model. I'm sure people like that show. I stopped watching like when I was, a teen. But there's so much out there, and I don't understand what why is RuPaul afraid of variety? And that's what it really boils down to, is he's worried that it's going to infringe on his brand and his money and his points of view, that he's quite frankly afraid of what we're doing. Because quite frankly, the work that's coming out of Brooklyn, the work that's coming out of Austin, the work that's coming out of Seattle and Chicago, and in the UK with Boy Box, like all this amazing stuff that is all this amazing shit happening in Berlin. Like, he is afraid of change, and it's time to grow up. Tangent over.
No,
Rant
that was
over.
not a tangent. That was a mission statement. That was a battle cry.
Well, you know me.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's good in Brooklyn? What would you tell people that they should be checking out? Actually, you said Austin. You said a whole bunch of places. Where should people go if they want to see all this?
Well, I mean, I just keep up with a lot of these people on the internet, but the first thing people need to do is go on Instagram and follow the hashtag Drag King, Hyper Queen, and AFAB Queen. That's what they need to do first. Follow those hashtags so you can just look at everything. And the main thing is to just look at what people are doing and see what's going on in different places. I can't really speak to those other scenes and cities specifically where to go, to see shows. But in Brooklyn, I actually am really, really spoiled. I spend a lot of time at one venue, Bizarre Bushwick, which is where I produce 3 different shows and go to a handful of others. But if you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot of energy and you're in the tri-state area, just look on Bazaar Bushwick's calendar and pick a day that you're off work the next morning and go. You will, odds are, see performance that you've never seen before. You will see a quality of work that is unparalleled in the, I would venture a guess to say globally, the stuff that's happening at Bazaar. Between Kit Kat, Beef, Fuck You Review, Hardcore, A+, and all of the other one-off shows that are happening on the weekends now, you're seeing world-class burlesque headliners. You're seeing drag performances that literally are not happening anywhere else. Mm-hmm. The stuff that is happening, I'll speak to my show. So with Beef, like, I can say without any hesitation, no one else in the country is doing what the performers I book at Beef are doing. There is no one else in the country doing the style of drag that my immediate drag family are doing. And quite frankly, there's no one else in the drag king scene that is doing the looks that I am doing. So if you don't want to dig too far and you just want to go to like a one-stop shop, just spend a month at Bazaar and you'll see everything. And then, I mean, then you just hop the train and get into Manhattan. Granted, I don't spend a lot of time in Manhattan. I'm very spoiled, but I'll brag on you for a minute. So White Elephant Burlesque, that's where I always tell people to go, because when they're asking about, I've never been to a drag or burlesque show, I don't know, usually their hesitation is because they work the next morning and they don't want to go out too late. So I always direct them to Rock Bar and say on Wednesday nights, starting around 8, you can go and see all genders, all bodies, all races, all presentations on a stage, sharing work, sharing energy, and it's the full spectrum. I mean, it's the full grid of everything that's going on in New York and Jersey, and it's just spectacular because the bar is welcoming, it's in a convenient location, it ends early, the drinks are strong, the drag is good, the burlesque is beautiful, and, I mean, it's just, we're spoiled, Victor. How do we even get out of bed in the morning? It's like, I don't need to do anything, we got this. It's true, though. It's amazing. The times we're living in. And RuPaul doesn't acknowledge any of it. That's sad.
Yeah. Do you think that Ru still goes to drag shows? I mean, I know that he once did.
No. Apparently, well, for a long time, I would listen to his podcast, him and Michelle's podcast. I used to religiously listen to it. And he was very vocal about, I don't go to shows. And don't even get me started on Michelle. I feel personally betrayed by her enabling this man. And it's like, you have a lot of influence over your friend, and you aren't speaking up for the community that you claim to unconditionally love, because the youngins, the young babies that love RuPaul's Drag Race, I mean, like 10, 12, like the tweens love Michelle. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be a 10-year-old non-binary trans person and hear my hero say that I will never be good enough for his show, and then to hear nothing from his best friend. I can't imagine. That's just, it's very bad. Everything is bad. I just, it's just so disappointing. It's just so disappointing. Because, frankly, he's missing out. And there are so many performers that the quality of work that they're showing and the heart that they have and the charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent that he claims to only judge by, he's just missing out on all of it because they don't have a penis attached to their body. And that's
or they do, but something else is not working.
Exactly. Yes. Of course. Yeah. But it's just very infuriating to me in so many ways. Because it's like, for me, it just it still invalidates my entire existence. Like hearing that people in power still view trans people as inherently less than, simply because we're trans. And very, very frustrating. How are you doing about it? You okay?
I've it's the thing is that I look at it and I see someone just grasping it. I see it in other people that I like, and I see it in struggling for relevance, and when no one's forcing you out. Like, that's the strangest thing. Is I understand what you mean about. It seems like there's a lot of fear and a lot of I mean, it might be because he's of an age where one starts looking at one's legacy, and he's always been very upfront that 30 years ago he didn't give a fuck about the next day, and he's now worrying about the next day. But I don't know if this is the right way to solidify a legacy, is to decide at 60 or at almost any age that, actually, you know what, at any age, that you know everything. And he speaks very matter-of-factly, and he talks about the parallels of Animal Farm and The Wizard of Oz and what we fail to see behind the curtain, and he has no self-awareness that he's behind the curtain. Like, he I don't want to say he feels that he's above it, because I don't get the sense necessarily that he's that snobbish, but it's almost like he's almost too cool for it. Like, it's like, honey,
it's like a willful,
it's not that
naivete
serious.
Almost.
If it's not that serious, then why are you so stringent in your opinions? You're like the worst hippie ever. How can you say we're all one and then say, oh, but this is how you want? And I understand that it's your show and you want to present a certain thing. Why is that what you want to present? And it's not just a matter of, oh, well, it's his show. Yeah, I get that. I understand he's executive producer, I think. At the very least, he's the co-creator and he's the figurehead. And I understand that he feels that he needs rules, or that he needs a starting place. My question then becomes, so why do you want to do that kind of show?
Yeah.
And you can say, if you're going to say in two breaths that all drag is valid and that certain people aren't invited to the party, it just seems sort of silly when you have you have a cast of characters and a cast of drag queens who the fans are vicious. And I have never particularly seen him act in a nurturing way when they're getting shit. I have never seen him come to their defense. I have never seen him say, y'all need to chill, it's just TV. He's never said it's just TV. No. He says it's just life, and it's the Matrix and all of these extra, like, not too particularly inventive parallels, but
well, I mean, the man hadn't even done his own makeup in like 30 years or some shit. Like,
because to him it is a job. When somebody says, RuPaul, why aren't you in makeup? Why aren't you in drag? He has been very upfront to say, because I'm not getting paid. And that I understand. To him, it is not an identity. To him, it is not. It is not a way of life. It is a medium. It's the same thing if he was a ballet dancer, or if he was a tap dancer, or if he was just an actor in television commercials. To him, it's just the job that's followed him forever. And the difference being, even though I think that we view television characters as that person, like that's why people get typecast, we view that person forever as that person. That's why we have such problems with people like Bill Cosby, and that's why we have such difficulty removing ourselves from liking certain actors in certain roles because we associate them with somebody else. And some of that's generational. You talk to people from the 70s, they never would have seen Betty White playing Rose. You talk to people in the 90s and today, they don't know anything about how she played in Mary Tyler Moore. Like, we're compartmentalized. And I don't think that he ever expected he'd be stuck to it for so long.
Right.
And for better or worse, this is where we're at, and he knows he has a platform, and he doesn't have to agree with anyone. I mean, he doesn't have to. Nobody has to. But then, and there are a lot of people on his side on this. There are a lot of people who are like, yeah, damn right. The problem is that's against his better interests as well.
Yes, absolutely.
But because he's a millionaire in Hollywood, who still gets pretty reasonable respect, although he is a black man in drag, he has a pretty decent cachet. He's not just like the Flip Wilson of today. He's actually an ambassador for our community, and that gets tricky when he stops checking in with the community.
Yes, absolutely. It's very similar to me when a producer in our local scene stops going to other shows. Like if I don't see specifically producers, I mean, performers, most of us have day jobs and most of us, we're busy or we're just, on a tight budget or whatever, and I understand that. But for me, if you're a producer and you're not going to other people's shows regularly, that's a problem. And Rue doesn't go to shows. He just started doing Drag Con, which, you can pay $50 to have your picture taken with him. That doesn't mean he's out walking the floor. That doesn't mean he's like checking in. I assume he doesn't do his own social media stuff, because if you're not doing your own costuming and makeup, Twitter.
I think he's on Twitter.
But how much emotional effort does it take to do Twitter? I mean, it's not really
on a national scale.
Well,
I think we actually know how much that is.
That's true, touche. I have put a personal ban on myself from Twitter. I am not allowed on Twitter because I am been known to run my mouth, so I am not allowed on Twitter. But I just think that there's such a huge disconnect between what he's trying to present versus what he actually absorbs, and I think that's the real root of the problem. I also, it's not good to just flat out call someone this. I think RuPaul's a misogynist. I think in a lot of ways, in many ways, he just, even though he embodies femininity and womanhood, quote unquote, and whatever that means to him. Sometimes. I just think that when it really boils down to it, Rue does not view women as equals or anything at all most of the time. It's a consumable thing to him. Femininity, womanhood, feminist, all those things. It's just another consumable good. And
to him, the women are what men put on dresses and heels to be, and men are who wear booty shorts and carry cocktails. That's an interesting. That's an interesting back and forth on Drag Race. Those are the roles of men and women on Drag Race.
And what was that quote he said a long time ago about will you ever allow women on RuPaul's Drag Race? He said, they have their own show. It's called the Miss Universe pageant. It's like, to you, that's the only drag a woman can do is if you look like that, like ignoring all of the body politics and the ableism and all of that shit. But, I mean, he's been on record saying these things, and it's like, at the end of the day, when it boils down to it, Rue, you're kind of a misogynist. And maybe you should deal with that.
In what galaxy? Because I usually say in what universe, but we're talking about Miss Universe. But in what reality is Drag Race like the Miss Universe or Miss USA or any of those? In what way? In what way? Just on the scale and the challenges and the I know, but one is
it's the only comparison I can think of is they're both on TV. It's so absurd. Because it also is saying,
I mean, I know it makes a good soundbite, and that's why he said it, but still.
Yeah. Well, and I also can't help but think that, like, this whole interview was just a way to get press. You know, like, oh, I'll say something kind of not okay, so I'll get a lot of really good press. And it's like, well, I guess you did, motherfucker. I just, you know, it's deeply disappointing, and if anything, it has brought a lot. In my feeds with the local queens, like a lot of queens that I respect, on their Insta stories, just put pictures of AFAB performers, trans individuals, non-binary people, hyper queens, gender fuckers, like just on their feed with a hashtag and their so that people could find them. Just like flooded their Instagram stories with that. And I mean, that's a really beautiful thing to come out of, is like local acknowledgement. Like, no, I see you. You are valid. You know that. You don't need me to validate you. I'm just saying. And so that's been a thing that's happened. There's been a lot of conversations on the Drag Race forums about this, and it's bringing up arguments, and maybe it's changing some minds. But the thing that we all have to remember is that not to compare RuPaul to a bully, but play with me in this space. Just follow me here. If whenever you stand up to a bully and you speak your mind, you're not trying to change the bully's mind. There's no way you can change their mind. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for the scared kid in the corner that is watching you do it. And for me, conversations like this, if I were to have this with RuPaul, I'm not going to ever try to change his mind. The idea is that maybe someone will overhear it, or maybe someone will listen and then do their own research. Because you can't change a bully's mind, and you can't change folks that have already made up their mind. That's something, that takes a certain level of self-awareness and a lot of time. I am a stubborn man, and when I, in my early 20s, was one of the most pig-headed individuals ever. I was very stubborn, and I did not like changing my mind. But over the past 5 years, and being involved in the queer community and interacting with people, good, bad, ugly, toxic, abusive, whatever, the thing that I could take away, if I stopped doing drag tomorrow, the main thing that I would take away about this experience as a storyteller is the power of being able to say you've changed your mind and that you've altered an opinion. And if Rue really wanted to be a hero for this community, saying, I was wrong, I have changed my mind, that's strength. Yeah. Asking for help and changing your mind are strength. And I hope he gets to that point, because that would be very vulnerable and very powerful. I don't know if he will, because he's rich and he doesn't have to.
I don't know if he's all that worried about being a hero.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's. I think he's more concerned with people finding their own path, but being in control of his own.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's just all deeply unfortunate. Yeah. I'm so frustrated my accent has come out.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear.
Mr. Leave Alone, tell me and tell the others where the children can go and be invited. Tell them your rundown at the bazaar.
Oh,
in one little chunk.
A little chunk. Well, first of all, you can follow me on Instagram at Mr.Leavealone, Leevalon. I post everything on there. You can find me at Bazaar on the third Thursday of the month for Kit Kat Cabaret that I produce with Vixen. You can find me on the third Saturday of the month, which is a open mic, drag, burlesque, vocals, whatever show called Jump Shark, and all the proceeds to that show go to Planned Parenthood. And you can also find me on the last Tuesday of the month, every month, for the only all drag king showcase in the city called Beef Show.
Beef Show.
And it's fun.
And is there something special that you're doing with White Elephant in June?
Oh my goodness, you don't say. Yes, as a matter of fact, there is. I'm still tickled to death that you asked me to do this. So in June, I will be doing a residency at White Elephant Burlesque. You will find me there every Wednesday for the month of June, celebrating Pride, being loud, and probably wearing many, many wigs. Very excited about that. And also, there is a potential for another Beef Squad White Elephant crossover, which is in the works, and we did the Evil Beef Attack of the Elephants show at Beef this last October for Halloween, and it was fantastic.
That was wonderful. That was
one of the best shows in the world.
Extraordinarily rewarding show. Well, Leave Alone, thank you for being out there and for being visible and being seen and being heard by that kid in the corner, or that one who came to the show who didn't quite know if the show was for them, but by the end of it knows that it is. And,
that's all we can try and do, I guess.
This call has been recorded.